Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. Come on in. Tell us where you are from, what grade you teach, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. Hey, Michelle. Hey, Kim. Hey, Amanda. First grade, kindergarten. Hi, Michelle and Vivian. Hey, Katie. Hey, Deborah and Jody. Hey, guys. I'm so glad you're here. See a lot of kindergarten and first grade, a lot of intervention. Hello, hello. Happy Sunday. Thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon with me. Hey, Sharon. I am so glad that you guys are here. We are going to get started. Hi, Diana from Wisconsin. Are you a Packer fan? It was such a good and sad game last night. So there's that too. It was a sad one. I was feeling really good about us. Feeling really good. And then my dreams were crushed. All right. So just a few housekeeping things. You can feel free to chat in the chat and talk to each other. You can talk to me. You can ask me questions. Sometimes I get a little distracted in the chat, so I will pause periodically throughout the PD to answer questions. If I catch them and they don't distract me too much, I will answer them in the moment. So just know that if you're asking a question, I will see it and I will respond to it. So today we're talking all about decodable texts, and I'm going to share my screen. Maybe I will. Let me pull it down here so that I can see it better and you guys can see it also. All right, I think that will work. There we go. All right. Hello from Toronto in North Carolina. Literacy volunteer at elementary school and Title I. Good for you, Ashley. Thank you for being here. Okay, so we're talking all about decodable text. And the reason I wanted to do this webinar is because I feel like as teachers, we hear a lot about phonics skills, how to teach phonics skills. And we hear a lot about how to do those, how to teach those skills in isolation. But we also want to make sure that we're making time for decodable text. So I'll be the first to admit that when I first started teaching first grade, I would teach phonics skills in isolation, and then I would hand my students a level text because I thought that was just what we were supposed to do. So that was several years ago, and that was kind of before I started figuring things out. But then once I figured what I thought I had figured out as far as phonics, teaching phonics and teaching the skills, I didn't quite have it figured out really, because I was teaching a lot of skills in isolation, but I was not making time for students to practice in context. And so that's kind of why I wanted to do this webinar, just to share with you guys what I've learned along the way and maybe help you kind of skip that learning curve and be able to utilize decodable text the best way that you can in your classroom. So these are our driving questions for today's webinar. We're going to talk briefly about what decodable texts are and why they're important. I'm going to show you what components that you should see in a decodable text if you are searching for them for your students. What are some good characteristics that good decodables have in them? We are going to talk about, I'm going to walk you through what a lesson looks like, and so how I can how you can effectively use those decodables in your classroom. And then we're going to talk about the challenges and some solutions for not only utilizing decodable text, but also supporting students who might be struggling with the use of decodable text. So I will share, I'm going to send out this recording so you'll have access to that. All right, so I want to know kind of how you feel about decodable text. I want you to give me a 1, a 2, or a 3. So if you feel really, really good about decodable text, I want you to put a 1 in the chat. If you are using decodable text, but you're not sure you're using them correctly, I want you to put a 2 in the chat. And if you are brand new to using decodable text, which is totally fine, I want you to put a number 3 in the chat. Lots of 2s. So you guys know that you're not alone. You're using them, which is great. You just want to make sure you're probably here because you want to make sure, hey, am I hitting all the pieces that I need to be hitting? Am I choosing the right texts? So I'm glad you guys are here. And if you are a 3, you are also not alone because that you are taking the first step and you're here and you're learning. So you are not alone. So lots of 2s. Awesome. I'm glad you guys are here. All right, so we're going to start off just by talking about what decodable texts are. So a decodable text are texts that are carefully chosen and they're controlled by phonics skills. And I highlighted controlled by phonics skills because I think it's important for us to understand that even though they may follow a certain phonics skill, what's important is that they are controlled by that phonics skill for the things that you have previously taught and what you're currently teaching. And so that's where a scope and sequence comes into play. So my first suggestion to you, if you are looking at decodable text, trying to figure out how to use them in your classroom, or if you're using them correctly, my first question to you would be, are you following a scope and sequence for your phonics skills? So are you following a scope and sequence that starts simple and moves more complex? Because you want to make sure that whatever you're teaching for your phonics skills, that you are following that up with a decodable text. So what I mean by that is I'm not going to focus on short A, for example, in my phonics lesson, and then give students a decodable text that might have short A with blends or might have vowel teams. I want to make sure that that connection is really, really tight. And so what happens when you do that and you follow a scope and sequence, then these decodable texts will grow with your students. So if I'm teaching short A this week and I'm teaching short I next week, and I have a really good, solid decodable text, then that decodable text is going to cover previously taught skills alongside those new skills that we're learning. So decodable text, we talked about what they are, let's talk about what they aren't. So they're not permanent. Decodable texts are meant to be a stepping stone for our students. Our end goal is to have students who are reading to learn. But we have to take the time with them when we are working through these phonics skills and teaching them to decode. We have to spend a lot of time there. And sometimes that's an uncomfortable space for us because we're skilled readers. And so listening to a child who is learning to decode can seem really, really, really hard to do. But we have to take the time to do that because we want to put them in those decodable texts. We want to have them work through those decoding skills so that we can then take them out of decodable text and put them in more authentic text that they can learn and grow from. So they're also not a quick fix. And so what I mean by that is just what I said as far as we want to sit in that uncomfortable phase with them as long as it takes, because we want to build that strong foundation for our students. And then they're not random. And so that goes back to talking about the scope and sequence and making sure that you are following your scope and sequence and that you're finding decodable texts that align with that scope and sequence. So Michelle says she has a hard time finding decodable texts that follow her scope and sequence. What scope and sequence do you use, Michelle? If you don't mind sharing. Phonics First, do they have decodables? Okay, yeah, see, that's that's kind of where we are in the world, right? Is like we have these programs that are really good with phonics, right? They have all the phonics skills, they have their scope and sequence, and we can teach lessons with our eyes closed. But then when it comes time to have time in context, that's where we kind of start to struggle. So hopefully I'll be able to help you a little bit with that today. So let's take a look at some key characteristics of decodables. So what should you see if you're choosing decodables for your students? So the first thing you should see, we've kind of already talked about, is that phonics alignment piece. So the words in that decodable text are aligned to the specific phonics skills being taught in your classroom. Okay, so for example, if I'm teaching short A, then I'm going to have predominantly short A words within that text. They have a controlled vocabulary. So when we're thinking about vocabulary, comprehension is something that's really important. And we know that research tells us in order to have a successful reader, we have to have a reader that can decode and comprehend. Those two come together to create a good reader. And so we want to make sure that we're spending time for students who aren't able to read that authentic text, that we're spending time building that background knowledge in the comprehension portion of our literacy block. But we also want to make sure that we're talking about the text that we're reading, that we're building background knowledge with these decodables, because we don't want kids to see a disconnect. If you ever have the opportunity to ask students in the classroom, and especially in kindergarten and first grade, why do you read? The majority of them aren't going to tell you that they read to learn, right? Because they're learning to read. And so we want to help make that connection for our students, and we want them to see that really we are reading to learn. And so in decodables, yes, we want vocabulary. We don't want them to be full of vocabulary, but we want to be able to have a discussion before reading about the vocabulary words they might see, right? So we want them to be controlled, and we want them to we don't want there to be too many. But we really want to make sure, we want to highlight, we want the star of the show to be those phonics skills that they have the opportunity to practice. We want to make sure that they have a sequential progression. So that goes back to that scope and sequence. So we want to make sure that they're organized sequentially, and they're gradually introducing new skills while pulling in the older skills that you've already taught, to pull those in for review. So this kind of progression supports reading instruction, because you're reviewing the old, you're bringing in the new, and then you're constantly going back and forth for that cumulative review piece. And you want to make sure that your decodables actually support decoding skills. So if you were to get on, let's say, Teachers Pay Teachers, or you are on a board to help select decodables for your school, you want to be able to have the knowledge to say, just because this label says decodable, I'm looking for these characteristics. Here is my checklist of things that I want to make sure the decodable text has before I say, yes, I want to use this with my students. And so one really big component is to make sure that it actually supports decoding skills. So if they are applying the skills that they're learning in context, then they are, those decodables do support decoding skills, right? If it's reinforcing what you're teaching in your phonics lesson, then it's a good text to choose. And then I wanted to put the phonemic awareness reinforcement in here, because we know from research now that phonemic awareness is really important, but it is really beneficial to our students if we can apply it to print. And we also know that the two most important components of phonemic awareness are blending and segmenting. So when a student is in a decodable text and they are sounding out a word, they are segmenting. When they blend that word back together, they are blending it back together, right? And so segmentation and blending are two really important components. That's what research tells us. So we want to make sure that the texts that we're using are supporting that letter and sound connection and aiding in helping our students become strong decoders. I'm going to stop for a minute. I have a few questions. So Michelle says, we are using UFly whole group and have kiddos on other things during small group. Not sure how to match them all, and we don't have a large selection of decodables. So I just got off an office hours call with my Route to Reading members, and we were having this discussion about curriculum and how it is hard to match things up. So Michelle, I would be happy to talk to you. I'd love to see kind of what it looks like for you. So send me an email and we'll talk a little bit about how, if you're doing like UFly, for example, for whole group, but then you're doing something different from small group, how you can kind of merge those two and really meet the needs of your students. And then Ashley says she's using Decodables to fill in the gaps for 2 third grade students. Great. Suggestions on how to know where to start, thinking in terms of a scope and sequence. So Ashley, the first place that I would start would be to give them a spelling inventory. So I have unit screeners that I use. And so you would give them that spelling inventory and then you would go through and figure out. So when you give the spelling inventory, you want to know 3 things. You want to know what do my students have a solid understanding of? What do they have absolutely no understanding of? So if the word is ship and they don't have the digraph there, they have no understanding of that. And then what are they using but confusing? So for example, if they are using E and I interchangeably, that might be a place to start. So you want to start with a spelling inventory, and then that will help you kind of figure out where to start with them. But I'm happy to talk to you about that too, to maybe look at that data with you. If you want me to, just send me an email. Michelle says you're a new Route to Reading member. Yay. Yeah. So we just did a coaching call all on your literacy block and all of that. So that would be in the January under coaching calls. So check that out and then send me an email. Chrissy says, can you use a decoding survey with the spelling inventory? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we need to remember too that not all students need decodable text. So Ashley's talking about 2 third grade students that she is using decodable text to help fill in the gaps, but I would bet that not every student in that class needs a decodable text, right? So you have to really think about the student, their needs, what the data says, and then determine whether or not they need those decodable texts or not. Because remember, they're just a stepping stone. So students who have direct letter sound instruction and are building automaticity with those sounds, they are ready to start practicing decodable text. But students who don't have a really close letter sound connection, and they haven't built a lot of automation yet with those, they're not really ready for decodable text, but they might be ready for reading words in isolation or reading sentence pyramids. So you really have to think about, and I'm going to share with you later in the webinar, ways that you can scaffold that for those things for your students. So we want to use these decodable texts ideally right after we've taught a phonics lesson. And because Wiley Blevins, who, if you ever hear me talk on webinars, I always mention Wiley Blevins because he's my favorite. But he says when he goes into schools and he works with teachers, what he sees is a lot of work at the phonics skill level, but not a lot of work at the application level. And he says it's at the application level where these skills stick. So we want to make sure that we follow up with those decodables for those who need it. So I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions because I'm getting ready to go into routines. So we've talked about what decodable texts are. We've talked about who might need decodable text, and I've also shared with you some key characteristics of good decodable text. So there are any questions before we go into routines for using decodable texts? Okay, I'm going to keep going. If I see something pop up, I can stop. All right, so when we're thinking about routines for decodable text, I really want you to think about breaking it into 3 components, okay? You've got your warm-up, which is your before reading. You have your time in text, which is your during reading. And then you have your follow-up or extension, which can happen immediately after reading, but you can also extend it into writing and independent activities as well. So when I first start a lesson and I'm working through introducing, if say we have just learned EA and I'm doing this as a whole group or I'm doing this in a small group, what I want to do is I want to ask questions, right? I want to say to my students, okay, boys and girls, we have been learning all about EA. We're going to read this text called The Beach. How many of you have ever been to the beach? And I'm going to talk about the sand, and I'm going to talk about the way it feels and the ocean waves and those kind of things. I'm building that background knowledge for them. I might talk about some vocabulary that they might see in the text. So I might say, okay, sandcastle, that's a really big word. Let's talk about what that means. And I might go through and have them help me find the word sandcastle in the text and talk about what a sandcastle is. Do the same thing for a seagull or the towel or sunscreen. So those are the vocabulary words. I'm going through those. I might also introduce, and the first day, if this is a whole group lesson, we might go through and we might circle. I might call students up to circle this EA. So I might say, can anyone find an EA word? Oh, there's one. Let's circle it. Everyone say this with me. E, C. Good. Oh, we've been working on EE also. So there's an EE word. We worked on AI last week. That was what we worked on last week. There's an AI word. So really talking through the text with them, right? So that's the prior, that's the before reading piece. So I might also do some phoneme grapheme practice. I might say, okay, here are some words that you might see in the text, and we're going to read those words ahead of time. We're going to get warmed up. We're going to read some words. We're going to read some phrases to just really get you warmed up to start reading. I'm also going to go through high frequency words. You shouldn't see a lot of high frequency words in a decodable text. But if you're following a scope and sequence, so like with my scope and sequence, the words you see here are all words that have been previously introduced. Students have mapped these words, so they're going to see them, but they're not going to be words they don't know. They're going to be words that in my phonics curriculum, we've already mapped and they already know, okay? And then I might talk about the vocabulary like I just shared with you on the previous page. I'm going to talk about what that is, introduce that vocabulary, and ask those questions. So something else that you want to do and you want to make sure that you do, especially with your students who are just becoming readers, is you want to make sure when they are reading that you are giving them immediate feedback. Okay. And so I always like to start the lesson before I have students read a text on their own. I like to give them just a little visual reminder. We use these decoding strips, and I say, okay, what do good readers do when they are reading? Because I just had a conversation on our office hours with a second grade teacher, one of the Route to Reading members, and she said, they look at words and they just guess. And typically when you notice that with students, what has happened is they have been in a balanced literacy classroom and they have been taught to read using the 3 cueing system. And so that is a really hard habit to break if that's how they've been taught, to always look at the picture, or to always look at the first sound and guess the word. So I always like to start before reading, reminding students what good readers do. They look all the way through the word. If they don't know what the word is, they're going to look all the way through it. They're going to sound it out. They're going to blend it back together. And then they're going to decide, does that make sense? Do I need to reread that sentence? So I like to give that reminder before reading, but during reading, when students are working through a text, it's my job as the teacher to make sure I'm giving them immediate feedback. Now, I know that when we have, at any given time during the day, I can have 4 to 6 kids at my small group table. I'm not going to be able to give immediate feedback to every single student at that table the entire time, right? But I want them reading. I don't want them sitting and waiting for Johnny to finish reading or Sally to finish reading. So I might have them stagger read. I might have them you start reading. Okay, now you start reading, and then come back around so that they're all at different starting places. And then I might choose 2 students. So I might say on my lesson plans on Monday or Wednesday, it's typically Wednesday when we get into reading text, I might say, okay, well, on Wednesday, I'm going to listen to Sally and Johnny read. And on Thursday, I'm going to listen to Kate and Patrick read. And so I'm going to look at it that way. And so that way I'm making sure I'm touching every student, but I'm making sure that I am giving feedback to at least 2 students a day. So if a student misses a word, what you want to do is you want to point to the word that they said incorrectly, and you want to say that spelling and sound it out. So I might say, okay, this is M-A-I-L. Listen to me sound it out. M-A-L, male. And then I might ask the student to do this exact same thing, sound it out with me. And then I'm going to ask them to read the word, segment it again, and read it a little bit faster. And then I'm going to have them go back and reread the sentence. And if you want to break that 3Qing habit and you're doing that with students who are constantly guessing, what's going to happen is they are not going to want to have to go back and read a sentence every single time they get the word wrong. So they are going to pay attention, and they're going to use those decoding strategies that you gave them to make sure that they are stopping, slowing down, and sounding out those words. Anna says, do you ever use decodable text in a whole class lesson? My intervention group is usually 12 to 14. Yes, and I will show you a routine for that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about partner reading and how that can be really powerful when you have big groups of students. Yes, and Jill says that the 3Qing is really hard to break. Yes, Bridget, I will. I'd be happy to share this queuing strip with you. If you email me, I will send it to you. If someone will remind me at the end, I can just upload it here so that everyone has it. Okay, now let's talk about our time in text. So when we're in text and during reading, kids might be doing things like recognizing the vocabulary that they have, that we introduced to them, right? They might be identifying words with some of those phonics skills. So when I first start reading with my students, when I first introduce a book on day one of that introduction, we're choral or echo reading the book. So that might be that I do it with this actual text, or I might have them, they might have their passage in front of them, and I have this pulled up and we're reading through it together. So I will say, okay, boys and girls, let's read it all together. Beaches have sand and shores. Okay, and we're going to keep reading. Or I might say, I'm going to read a sentence and then I want you to read it. So I would say, beaches have sand and shores. Your turn. And they are pointing and they are echo reading. So that might be day one. Okay, or, it depends on your students and how strong they are in whatever phonics skill you're working on. You may have them read it independently. I personally like to spend the first day choral and echo reading. And that reminds me, I also think that sometimes we have this misconception about decodable text that we can only read it one time. And we read it and then we have to put it away and we have to get another book. And I think along that same line, which this is not a comprehension webinar, but we do the same thing with read alouds, right? We think, oh, we read it, they're going to be bored if we read it again. And that's not the case. So if we are rereading Decodables, we are giving students ample time to practice. And when they have lots of decoding practice, what happens? They're building fluency. So what I typically do is I will choose one decodable text and we'll read it at least 3 times during the week, if not more. And then after reading, we want to make sure that we go back, we hit that vocabulary, we review that with our students, and we want to ask and answer questions, because remember I said it's not all about comprehension with Decodables, but we still have to make that connection for our students. They still have to see that the purpose for reading is to learn about things, right? And so we want to make sure that we do that. And we can also extend our Decodables into writing. A great way to have students writing is to just say, hey, boys and girls, we just read all about mail, or we just read all about beaches. I want for you to write 3 sentences telling me something that you learned about beaches, because here's what's going to happen. If they just read a decodable text about beaches with that controlled vocabulary and controlled phonics, then guess what words they're going to be writing? They're going to be writing the words that they have been reading in their text, which are the words that they have been focusing on for their phonics skills. So they're applying it even more through writing. So that's a really great way to have an extension. So you could read it, and then part of their independent practice time or part of their time during station work is to write in their journal about what they learned with their text. Okay, let's talk about partner reading, because when you have a big group of kids, sometimes it's really hard. And so day 2, after we've choral and echo read the story or the book, then we might work on partner reading. And so partner reading, repeated reading, or we might practice reading together. So partner reading is can be really beneficial in your classroom, and it can really help build fluency, but you have to make sure that you have systems in place and expectations in place for what this time looks like. So we might spend 10 minutes partner reading the text from yesterday. And my students know when we are partner reading, they are crisscross on the carpet or at their desks, wherever you want them to be. We typically have them spread out around the room. They're crisscross. Their paper, their passage is in front of them, or their book. It's in front of them, and then the other partner is facing them. So their passages are like back to back. And so what you want to do when you're pairing students for decodables and partner reading, you want to pair your higher students with your middle students, and you want to pair your middle students with your lower students, because when you're doing that, you're kind of, if you pair a high and a low, they're just going to be, both of them are going to end up being frustrated, right? So you want to make sure that you think about that. And then what you will do is you will have the higher of the two students will read the text first while the other student follows along. Then they're going to read it together. And then and then the other partner is going to read. And so you want to make sure that you, and all in that 10 minutes, they have read 3 times. They listened to someone read and followed along. They read it together with their partner, and then they read it on their own. So in 10 minutes, they read through that 3 times. And so you also want to kind of set the expectation for, if a student misses a word, what is your role as a partner, right? And we want to have that respect conversation, okay? Everybody here is learning. We're all learning how to read. And so if your friend or your partner misses a word, what I want you to do is what I do for you when you miss the word, right? You're going to point that word out to them, and you're going to have them go through that process of let's sound it out together. Let's sound it out on your own. And now let's go back and reread it. So it does take time. And I'm not going to say that it doesn't, because building that kind of routine in your classroom, it really does take some time. But we have first grade students now that it took us about 3 weeks to get it really rolling, but now they know exactly what to do, and it is beautiful. It is beautiful. So, and it's worth it, because now we're building fluency. And Anna, when you have those 12 to 14 kids in your room, when you have this working, it allows you to go and listen in on students, so you can reach more students during that time. Jeanette says, do you set a timer for switching readers? I don't, because I don't want to put that pressure on them, but you certainly could. It just depends on your students. My kiddos know, okay, we're going to read it, and then I'm going to read it, and then my partner's going to read it. And so they kind of work through that. Okay, let's talk about what a typical week looks like. So I want you to notice that from Monday to Friday, what happens? Monday and Tuesday, you'll see that it's pretty skills and isolation focused, right? We're doing that typical, the phonemic awareness warm up, the 3-part drill. We're doing the introduction to the new phonics skill. I might do some word chaining. I might have them read words in isolation and do a dictation, okay? Tuesday, very much the same, except I might switch up the word chaining. We might do some phoneme grapheme mapping. I might have them, instead of reading words in isolation, to practice some sentence pyramids, and maybe do a dictation if there's time. On Wednesday, you'll see we did that PA warm up. We did the 3-part drill. So we're bringing in that cumulative review piece, and then we're going right into the text intro. So that's where I might pull it up on the active board if I'm doing it in a whole group, or I might have students at a small group. Everybody has that copy, and we're talking and walking through the text. And then we're going to choral and echo read that text. On Thursday, we're going to review. I'm going to remind them of what we read. I might ask them some of the same questions I asked them on Wednesday, just to give them a little refresher of the book. We're going to reread. So that might be a time where I have my students stagger read, and I might be listening in as they're reading. And I might do a dictation. And then on Friday, so now we've read the text, we have chorally read it. We've echo read the text. They've had an opportunity to read the text on their own, independently in small group, their safe space, right? Now For the fourth read, they might be working with a partner. So for the fourth read, they might be reading it together and then they take turns reading it. So by the time they get to the fifth time reading it, you're not going to have kids that are nervous, right? They're going to feel pretty confident when they get with their partners for reading. So they're really focusing on building that fluency. And then we might work through the comprehension questions. Are there any questions on that? So you can see skill heavy. As the week goes on, what am I doing? I'm giving more time for application, more time in text. So Jill says, since I'm an intervention teacher that does groups during the classroom, during the teacher small group reading time, I do 3 15-minute groups. That 15 minutes goes by fast. It is hard to get everything in. Any suggestions? Yeah. So you can split it up. And because you're intervention, you might take this and it might stretch over 2 weeks, right? So you might on Monday do like, get my pointer over here. You might do the warm up, the 3-part drill, and intro to skills. Tuesday, you might do some word chaining, words in isolation, and a dictation. So you might take this and spread it out over 2 weeks because you are in that intervention setting and you have the ability to do that. Or communicating with your teacher, you know, a good MTSS system, you guys are kind of working and doing the same things. So the kids are getting a double dose of whatever you're doing. So talk to the teacher that's in the room and say, hey, what if you do the phonics skills and I do the decodable? Or what if you do the decodable and I do the phonics skills? So really talk and communicate with the teacher in the room. Does that make sense? So a 3-part drill is you are going to do the visual drill. So I might have my cards here and I'm just going through and I'm only going through the sounds that they have done and they're going to tell me what those sounds are. And then an auditory drill is where I say the sound is and students have something to write on and they'll write says and then the blending drill, if you can see back here, back behind me is the blending drill. Those are the blending drill cards. So the teacher is reading with students. So it would be like at cat, and they're all reading those words together. Okay, so let's talk about those kids that have some individual needs that might be struggling to read a decodable text. Let's talk about how we can best support them. So there are a lot of things that we can do, from spending more time at the skill level to giving them visual supports, changing up the length of the decodable text that we are using. And so I'm going to walk you through those. So when we are working with students who are struggling, we want to be able to give them some differentiation. And so I think that if they're struggling to read a text, that's an indication that they don't have that skill. They're not solid within that skill. So that means that we might need to take a step back and we might need to spend some more time at the skill level. They might need to do some phoneme grapheme mapping. They may need to practice some word chaining. They may need to do this blending drill so that you, the teacher, are modeling what good blending and segmenting, what it looks like to sound out a word. And they might just need to build their confidence, and you could use some fluency grids and have them practice reading words in isolation and then push them back into a decodable text. They may need some visual supports. So like the decoding strips that I was sharing with you earlier, they may need to have that sitting in front of them as they're reading their decodable. If you've just worked on, say we're reading that text beaches. So if you've just worked on EE and EA, what you might want to do is put EE and EA on a card for them and have that there so that they know. So EE as in meat, EA as in peach, or whatever, just so that they have that kind of that visual reminder. Something else that you can do is scaffold the decodable length. And so I think that there's this misconception that a decodable text has to be a book or a passage, right? But a decodable text for a kindergartner is at the word level, right? They're sounding out the word at cat, and they're going to the next word. Then they might go to the phrase level where they are reading. So if you haven't seen like the fluency phrases, it's basically they have at the top is one word. So like if the sentence is we like to eat. So then it's we, and then the next line is we like, and then the next line is we like to, and then the last line is we like to eat. So they may need that, and that's okay. That can be their time in text. That can be their application, their decoding practice, right? So you might have them do that pyramid. You may have them. There's a lot of research out there to say that kids who are working on building fluency using phrases can be really, really beneficial. So you might have little 3-word phrases from the text and have them read those, and before you put them into reading the whole entire text. You might have them just read sentences from the text so that they aren't feeling too overwhelmed with the whole gamut of the whole book or the whole text. And then you can move them into reading the text, right? That's our end goal, but they may need these scaffolds first. Okay. And then you may need to, like I was talking just a minute ago with Jill about intervention. So you may need to gradually release those new concepts. So it might take you 2 weeks, and that's okay, right? Because we want to make sure we're building that foundation. So we want to ensure that our students have mastery before moving on. And we also want to make sure that we're continuously reviewing what we have previously taught with our students, because, like Wiley Blevins says, he says it takes 4 to 6 weeks for a skill to really stick. So if we're teaching it and we're moving on, that might be why a student is struggling. We have to teach it, and then we have to build in time to review those previously taught skills. Okay, and then celebrate small victories, because when students start reading, we may think because we're skilled readers that it should be an easy endeavor, but it is not. It is a huge hill to climb for students. And when students are first learning to decode, they're having to look at the letter, recognize the sound, have the ability to blend, have the ability to segment, have the ability to read the word and then understand what that word is. There are a lot of things happening in their brain. So if for the week they were able to read a sentence pyramid and last week they could only read words in isolation, that's a victory for them, right? We should be celebrating those, and you should be celebrating the fact that you as the teacher took them from only being able to read at the word level to reading at the sentence pyramid level. And then we want to make sure that we also do regular, I call them regular temperature checks. So we want to check in. How are they doing? Are they able to spell words? Okay, are they, if we're teaching short U words, are they able to spell those words through their dictation, right? Are they able to read those words in isolation? Can they read those sentences? Can they read them in text? So, you don't have to do all of these components, because if you do all of these components, it's not really a temperature check, right? You may choose one. If you notice they're struggling to read and to decode in a text, then you might say, let me see how they can do at the sentence level. Maybe that's where they are. Or if you notice through their dictation that they're not carrying those skills over, maybe you want to give them a quick spelling assessment and say, are they able to spell these words? So you just want to make sure that you are doing those temperature checks with your students. Are there any questions? So just remember that decodable texts are like training wheels, and we have to take the time to use them and to utilize them appropriately for our students, because we want to take those training wheels off and we want to build confident readers who are fluent and who are able to understand what they are reading. So we want to make sure that we take the time to do that, and that we take the time to allow our students to have that productive struggle. And they can only really have that productive struggle if they're having time in context. And so they do that through using those decodable texts that we carry over from our phonics lessons. So Lillian, the quick checks are under assessments in my shop. If you are in the Route to Reading membership, they are in there also. So I can send you, if you just send me an email, I can send you the link to those. I love geodes, Ashley. I think they're great. I think if they, if they follow your scope and sequence, I think that is great. I know Kaylee, who is part of the Literacy Adventures team, she uses those a lot. So I think they're great. We unfortunately have not been able to purchase them, but it's on my list. So if you have them, I'm really glad that you have them. Do you have a template to create your own running records for decodable books and passages, etc.? You know what? I don't, but that would be a great resource to be able to provide to teachers, to have a blank one that could go along with any of the decodables you're using. So I'm going to make a note of that, because that'd be great. Are all the lessons and components that you showed today in the decodable packs that you shared yesterday? Yes, and I will share those with you in just a few minutes. And then Bridget says, any suggestions to keep other K students focused during small group time? Yes, and I've been there. If you know me, you know that I taught kindergarten as well, and that is the struggle. We do literacy stations. I know that, and there's this thing out there right now about how like independent work is not good. Like we shouldn't be doing it. I feel a little differently about that. I feel like independent work needs to happen because kids need to know how to work independently. We just have to be smart in the activities that we're choosing. So Bridget, literacy stations, I have a ton of literacy stations that we use in my kindergarten classrooms to keep kiddos busy. And it's just a lot of training that goes into that. And I'm not sure if you're en route to reading or not, but en route to reading, there is a whole mini course on literacy stations, setting them up, setting your kids up for success. And then the literacy stations are in there as well. You're welcome. Just email me too. I'm happy to help you if you have questions. So with all of this being said, I wanted to share with you, if you haven't seen already, that we just created a whole set of nonfiction decodables. And I want to tell you the story behind why these were created. So I work with a group of second grade boys. And as we were reading, I mean, we have just right reader books. They're amazing books. Like I will preach about them always. Okay. So I'm like sitting there and I'm like, what is going on? These boys are not interested in what we're reading. Well, they're second grade boys, right? They're 8 and 9-year-olds. And I finally just asked them, I was like, what is the problem? Like, what's going on? Why are you guys focused? And they're like, we just want to read real books. We want to learn about stuff. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? And then they start telling me, like, I want to learn about animals. I want to learn about ships. I want to learn about sports. All these things. And then I was like, we really don't have nonfiction decodables about stuff, right? And so that is kind of why I created these. I created them for them because I want them to find value in the time that they spend with me. And so they have loved them. And my teachers have loved them. And so I wanted to create something that maybe other teachers could love and use for their students as well. So there are 8 sets of them. They do follow my scope and sequence. And this is kind of what that looks like. We've kind of merged, like all short vowels are together, all blends and nasals are together, are controlled, that kind of thing. Oh, thank you, Jill. Yes, of course. And if you guys know me, if you ever listen to me talk, I never share anything that I have not personally used or the teachers in my building have not personally used, because I feel like that is important as well. So these decodables there are over 40 different titles. They have the projectable version, like I shared with you, for beaches. So those are in there, so that you can kind of use that as your whole group introduction if you want to, or your whole small group introduction. They have the independent passages. So the book version is what you see right here, which has like the just at a passage level. They have the warm-ups here that have words and phrases from the text. And then they also have the teacher's guide here. So it gives you the vocabulary, it defines the vocabulary for you, it gives you the pre-reading questions and the after reading questions and the extension. And so all of that is in there for each book. And so here's just a look at what it looks like. And something else to note is it's really important to make sure that your scope and sequence, I think a lot of scope and sequences shy away from morphology in these early skills, and we really shouldn't, because let's really think about morphology for a minute, okay? It seems like a big scary word for K2 teachers. That's how I felt when I first learned about it. But really, like, a child can tell the difference if they're reading if they're reading about a baby chick, okay? They can tell the difference between one chick and two chicks, right? If I have one chick, it's a chick. If I have two, I'm putting an S on the end and it's chicks, right? It's just making it plural. Same for foxes. It's really easy to say, like, you know, we're learning about foxes, we're adding in that ES and explaining that to students. Talking about open and closed syllables. We should be talking about open and closed syllables in kindergarten, because think about the sight words that we see in kindergarten. He, she, me, we, all of those are open syllable words. Why not just throw it out there to them? Hey, boys and girls, when the door is open on this word, the vowel says its name, a long vowel sound, right? ING. That's something that kids should know and be able to use. Same with ER and same with this tricky Y. So we don't want to shy away from introducing those, because kids can learn those things. We just have to teach them. And so here's the decodable, the projectable one. There's a projectable one for every single book. And then here's just a closer look. So here's your teacher's guide. Gives you all the information you need. And then here's one that you could use for independent practice. You could send it home. You could use it in your literacy station. Those are all in there. Oh, I see some questions. Hey, Michelle. Yeah, I can give more information about route to reading. I'll do that here in just a few minutes. Oh, thanks, Kimberly. I'm so excited that you are going to use them with your kids. Yes, Lisa, I'll share some more about the route to reading membership. Oh, you're welcome, Jill. Thank you. Okay, so the Decodables, actually, I didn't change this from yesterday. I woke up yesterday morning and I was like, $45 seems like a lot. And if you had the opportunity to sit in on our team meetings, I'm always like, yeah, but teachers spend their own money. And so the books are actually $60, but they're $30 now. They're 50% off. And that's for the whole entire set. That's for all of them. And the teacher's guides, the projectables, the independent, all of the whole thing. So they're not 45, they're 30. They're 50% off today and tomorrow if you want them. And I will drop the link for you so that you have that. Let me see if I can do that now for you. Well, maybe I can. Let's see. Let me pull that up. And you guys can ask me any questions that you have too as we are wrapping up. And then I will share, for those of you who want more information about route to reading, I will share those. So these are if you are in route to reading, please do not purchase these decodables. They're already in the hub for you. So please don't purchase them. I just dropped the link for the decodables. Thank you, Beth. So the route to reading membership is just a monthly membership. You can subscribe for the month, or you can subscribe for the year. And basically we call it all access. You have all access to any and every resource that I create, that's in my Teachers Pay Teachers store, that's in the Literacy Adventure shop. It's all in the membership, all in one place. We also do monthly coaching calls. We spend time talking about topics just like this PD that I did today might be, we will do a PD on a different topic like that in the Route to Reading membership. We do that once a month. We have a happy half hour where we just kind of get on and chit chat with teachers that are all kind of in the same headspace as we are. And then we do office hours twice a month. So the office hours, you can just hop on and it's like a one-on-one or small group coaching session where you can ask questions and I can help you through certain things that you might be struggling with in your classroom. So Lillian says, oh, you want to see the other, Anna wants to see the other Decodable books. Yes, I can pull those up too for anybody that wants to stay on. Lillian says, do you just focus on one passage or book? I do. It just depends on my students. I have kids that can do a little faster pace, but sometimes we just do one depending on where they are. You're welcome. I would definitely look into the geodes. I have the next grant that I have that I get from school. That's what's going to be on my list. That and Just Right Readers. Just Right Readers is another great if you have like school money to spend. Oh, and speaking of school money, if you want your school to pay for the Decodables for you, just send me an email and we can set that up for you too. And they can also pay for Route to Reading membership. All of those you can have them pay for. All right, so let's see if I can pull up. Somebody wants to see, let's see, Anna wants to see what the texts look like. So I'll pull those up. Share my screen. Okay, so if you download the Decodables, you're going to get, if you get the bundle, you'll get all of them, or you can purchase them in individual sets. So let's take a look at set 6. So set 6 is vowel teams, which we know can be very tricky. And so we have 10 books in that set. So this will have more. Most of them just have the 5 books. So when you open your file, you've got foldable books, you have your Decodable Teacher's Guide, and then you have your teacher slide. So if I open up foldable books, and let's take a look at Beaches, because that's one we shared today. I don't think it's sharing. Let me reshare now, or I'll pull it over here maybe. Okay, let me reshare. Sorry about that. So Jody, the Route to Reading membership is $17 a month or $150 for the year. Okay, so this is what they look like. Now, when you download them, they are in a PowerPoint. And the reason they're in a PowerPoint is because, and you can't mess them up. Like, you can't move or click anything. I've locked that down so that you can't, like, don't be afraid that you're going to mess something up, because you won't. The pages are different. And the reason, like, if you look at this, for example, you'll see it's like page 1 and page 10. So when you print your Decodables, I have one here. When you print them out, if this wasn't folded, okay, they're going to look like this is page 5 and 6, but then this is page 3 and 8. And the reason that I did it that way is because when you pull it out of your printer, all I wanted you to have to do is fold it and it's ready to go. Okay, so that's why the pages are the way they are. I got these printed at Staples. I did spend a little bit of money on them, but I knew that, especially with those second grade boys that I was going to have, that they were going to, if I was going to print them in color, I wanted them to last. But I have some of my second grade teachers just printed them. Some of them printed them in black and white, and the kids still love them. So you don't have to print them in color. They print fine in black and white. And they just printed them on their school printer, and they look great. So yeah, so this is what they look like. They've got the reminder here for, there we go. So they've got, this is what they'll see. They'll see this page and this page. This is like their warm up. And then they go through and they're reading, and then they have their, after reading, you have your vocabulary and your questions as well. So, oh, thank you, Diana. Thanks, Jody. I will share a link to Route to Reading as well. Yes, let me pull that up for you. I would love to have you guys in the Route to Reading membership. It's a pretty cool place to be. We are a pretty close group. All right, I will drop that for you. Brittany says, if we have a MacBook that doesn't have PowerPoint, will we still be able to open? Brittany, that is a great question. And I don't know the answer to that. So email me so that I don't forget, please. You can put my email here, and I will look into that for you. Because I could just send them to you as a PDF also, if that's the case. Yeah. Is there a set of decodable books that is not nonfiction? So I do not have books that are fiction. That's next on my list, is to create those. And I kind of did it backwards. But like I said, the reason for doing it is for those boys. I love Just Right Readers. I think they are amazing. I do have decodable passages. And those are separated by skill, kind of like the books, but they are just the passages. Jamie, I do have decodables that are appropriate for kindergarten, and I would start at the sentence pyramid level, and I'll drop those for you so that you can see those. Let's see. I'm going to share and show you, Jamie. Let me see. Here we go. So if you go to my shop and you go right here and click on the search bar, Jamie, click Decodables. Let's do decodable. Maybe that'll work. Yeah, there we go. So do decodable, and then there are all kinds, but I'm thinking kindergarten, these right here, the decodable practice, these are great. Here are the fiction ones that I have. So they have like the warm up, and then they have the passage. Mix and fix sentences are great, Jamie, but this is what I was thinking right here. Either the decodable sentence pyramids, or the words and isolations and sentence and then the sentences. So any of those would be great. But if you are in Route to Reading, those are in there too. Okay. Anna, the nonfiction decodables are not on TPT yet. They will go on TPT on Monday. Yes, Michelle, everything that is in my Literacy Adventures shop and in TPT is in the Route to Reading membership. And I can say that with confidence because I just spent Christmas break cross-checking everything to make sure that everything was in there. So, and if we missed something and you see something that's in the Route to Read, or you see something that's in the Literacy Adventures shop and you're like, hey, that's not in the membership, just email me and I will make sure it gets in there. Okay. All right, any other questions about decodables before I let you guys go on this Sunday afternoon? Thank you for being here with me. I really appreciate it. If you had questions and I ask you to email me, just email me and I'll be happy to answer them for you. Thank you, thank you. Thanks for being here. Thank you. I hope that you walk away feeling good about whatever decodables you're using. Thank you, guys. Thanks for being here. Thank you, thank you. Oh, thank you, Diana. Thanks, guys. Oh, thank you, Michelle.